I want to welcome everyone to the March 12th, 2014 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Rich Ovutino.
Here.
Jake McDonald.
Here.
Terry Knowles.
Here.
John Nuremberger is here. Sherry Bilderback.
Here.
Michael Daming.
Here.
Dan Glowski.
Here.
Jennifer Hansen.
Here.
David Devitt.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nuremberger. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the February 12th, 2014 minutes? Are there any revisions? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved. We have one item under old business today, a petition for approval of an amendment to Chapter 25, Article 6, Division 8 of the Brentwood zoning ordinance pertaining to flood hazard control regulations. You'll recall we took this up at our February meeting and spent a good deal of time discussing its merits. And I believe the commission was on board and had a consensus on everything except the definitions of substantial improvement and substantial damage. And we had directed the city planner to do some additional investigation on some questions that were raised. And Mr. Wise, it's my understanding that you did perform that investigation?
That is correct.
And can you please bring the commission up to speed on what your insight and findings have been in response to those requests?
Sure. There were, coming out of the last meeting, there were basically three items that the commission asked staff to look into. The first was actually not in relationship to the definitions that you referenced, but they were actually to Section 25-494 as they pertain to recreational vehicles. There was a minor adjustment to, instead of saying A and B or C, that it just combined A and B into one A and then or B. So that change has been made in the information that was prepared for you this evening. The second item that staff was asked to do was to send out letters of notification to potentially impacted property owners. We've, of course, done that as you see this evening. We sent out 294 letters. We erred on the side of caution. If any property was, according to St. Louis County records, if it was touched by the 100-year floodplain or very near, we went ahead and sent them a notice because we wanted to make sure that everyone got that notice. I've heard personally from about 15 people of those 294 letters, some of which are in the audience this evening, and I'm sure that they'll speak to their concerns. I think in general, to kind of summarize the feedback that I've heard directly from people, I had one individual who was concerned that the changes would actually provide a disincentive for property owners to invest into their property owners if the city, or into their property if the city moves forward with this. I've heard several people that they were questioning basically how this impacted them, or if it impacted them. I believe that there were at least two individuals that called and they said that they had gone through a process in the last several years doing some sort of a map revision to show that their structure was not in the floodplain. They were afraid that the changes would basically require them to have flood insurance. I talked to them. I relayed that none of the changes the city is looking at with this changes any of the districts or any of the requirements for flood insurance. That these are specifically changes to regulate how improvements for non-compliant structures is regulated by the city. The third question that came up from the commission was the idea of liability. I kind of paraphrased a response that I did receive back from the State Emergency Management Office, and kind of what they said in a nutshell was, under our existing ordinance, or if we were to expand that, the city does have an obligation to fulfill and enforce our own ordinances. Chapter 89 of the state statute does basically regulate the requirement for cities to implement flood hazard ordinance requirements gives that power to the cities. And so whether it's a cumulative improvement that we're looking at or whether it's our current regulations, yes, there is some liability that is incurred on that. Those were the three items that the commission directly asked staff to look at. There was a little bit of additional information that was provided in the staff report. A couple of comments from the comprehensive plan that were put in to kind of highlight some of the balances that the comprehensive plan seeks. That there's this balance of there are areas where we have flooding issues right now that the city desires to mitigate those flooding issues through a variety of ways. And then there's also a section on page 37 where it talks about an area south of Manchester where it's within the Deer Creek floodplain, and so reuse of existing structures is a primary strategy. So the plan does address this in part. It doesn't speak directly to this, but it was staff's opinion that the plan looks to kind of seek a balance of allowing reuse, but also trying to promote compliant structures that would mitigate losses over time within the city. The last section that was added in was kind of following those same lines, was the purpose and intent section from the actual zoning ordinance, and this comes from chapter 25 within the zoning ordinance, and it's the purpose and intent of the flood hazard control ordinance itself. And it basically talks about that it is the purpose of the regulations to promote the health, safety, and general welfare, to minimize losses due to flooding, establish and maintain the community's eligibility as a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program, and to meet the requirements of essentially state and federal regulations. So that information was also provided in the staff report. Finally, there was a recommendation provided. It was staff's opinion that the proposal that is before the commission seeks to promote compliant regulation. It seeks to allow for a period of time where property owners can make investments into existing structures, but it also has the end goal of ultimately ending up with compliant development within the city of Brentwood that would reduce flood losses, would reduce property impacts, as well as safety of the residents and patrons of the city of Brentwood. So staff was of the opinion that this was consistent with the city's policy and recommended, and we believe that approval is recommended. There was one item that was kind of left in the air last time, and that was the horizon period, or what I would refer to as the horizon period within the section that deals specifically with the substantial improvement portion of it. The information that was presented to the city proposed either a 10-year horizon that would be a rolling target that the city would look at, or a useful life of the building, I guess, for lack of a better word. At this point, staff is recommending that the commission consider going with the 10-year horizon because it basically allows that flexibility within the comprehensive plan that is discussed.
Okay, primarily for the benefit of the audience, let me try to walk you through a little bit of background. So it's my understanding that the current requirement for properties in the floodplain, to the extent a single improvement is proposed for one of those properties, and that single improvement exceeds 50% of the value, that property owner is required to flood-proof the building.
Correct.
Okay. And it's my understanding that over the last year, there's been a substantial increase in insurance rates for properties in floodplains.
It's been escalating over a period of years, but I think the most substantial increase happened at the end of 2012, so about a year that they've been going up. That is correct.
And one of the primary reasons we're looking at these changes are for purposes of the city becoming named as a CRS community. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And private insurance companies recognize CRS community status and discount insurance rates for properties in floodplains?
The flood insurance is actually issued by the federal government.
I see.
So it's a federal government program where they essentially seek to incentivize additional regulation that reduces their likelihood of paying out. So they pass on some of that benefit, or I don't know exactly how much, but they pass some of that benefit on to property owners within the city. If the city were to move forward with this, we don't know exactly where we would end up. Based off of our conversations in looking at other municipalities around who've joined the program, I would expect that we would initially look to probably get about an initial 10% discount on those flood insurance policies within the city.
Were we to become a CRS city?
That is correct.
Okay. And in order to become a CRS city, we either need to change this single improvement, being the trigger event, to improvements either over a 10-year period, to the extent those improvements exceed 50% of the property's value, or to the extent improvements over the lifetime of a building exceed 50% of the property's value. Those would be the triggers for the flood proofing.
That is correct. I think I understood you correctly. Say it again, just so I...
We do have a choice tonight, but we do have to make this choice in order to be eligible as a CRS program. This is not a this choice, as far as the substantial damage evaluation, is not a requirement to become a CRS community. But what it does do is they give you points for... They have, I believe that there are 18 different categories, and within each of those 18 categories, there are numerous things that they look at. And for each of those items, they give you some number of points, and then each of those number of points is weighted. It's not a very user-friendly calculation, but it lays it all out. This would give the city more points and thus ultimately increase the discount that flood insurance rate policies would receive. Okay, so to the extent the city changes its rule of the single event to either a cumulative approach, 10-year or lifetime of building, it will increase the discount in the insurance rates.
That is correct.
Okay, and staff's recommendation, and certainly it seems to be less onerous for property owners, would be the 10-year requirement as opposed to the lifetime of the building requirement.
That is correct.
Okay, very good. Questions from commission members? Mr. Demmett.
Justin, for clarification, the use of the word cumulative, if I understand what you just told the chairman, is while that word is not necessarily required by either SEMA or FEMA, by using that word, though, there is a benefit to the city and, more importantly, to the property owners, because the insurer takes that into consideration, and that can play a factor in reducing the premiums.
That is correct.
Okay. So it's not a requirement, but it would operate to reduce the premiums.
That is correct.
Okay.
And another point of clarification, improvements that require permits are what get added into this calculation. So if you were to come in and rip the carpet out and put new carpet in, that doesn't get taken into account. But if you come in and you start ripping walls down and building new walls or doing improvements that require building permits, those are what the city would track.
And and then the other question that I have is, this applies equally to commercial and residential properties.
That is correct.
And commercial and residential properties are currently, they have some type of insurance for flood. Is that right? They can participate?
They can participate. They're not inherently required to have flood insurance. Usually the trigger to require flood insurance comes through a federally backed mortgage. Most people that are going to secure a mortgage would require, if you're in the floodplain, that you have the flood insurance.
And you maybe don't know the answer to this one. If this was not to apply to residential properties, but only to commercial properties, would the residential property still enjoy the discount in the premium, do you think?
No. I think when it comes to the federal government, it's an all or nothing. All development in the floodplain, whether commercial or residential, is treated equally.
Okay. And then finally, one of the documents that I read, it said something about a potential 15 to 45% decrease in the premium. If you could just speak to that a little bit, because what you mentioned earlier was a 10%, and just if you could help me out with that.
So there are 10 different classes that they assign, from 10 being a 0% discount, but you're technically a member of the community and likely moving towards trying to adopt policies and regulations that would get you more points and get you a discount, to class 10, which gets you a 45% discount. And so each set, I believe that each range is 500 points. So as you get 500 points, you would move up from a class, 1 to 2. So you would go from a 5% discount, and I'm actually a class 10 to 9. And so you would go from a 5% to a 10% discount. And again, that would be across the board, regardless of residential or commercial.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's it.
Any other questions from commission members? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. I had a quick question about the cumulative nature of in the context of the 10-year proposal, or any of these cumulative ones. Is the city capable of working retroactively? You thought I was going to ask a different question. So if this is enacted, does that 10-year window apply back to
we would
2004?
start today.
Starts today.
Yeah, we would have no interest in going back and pulling all of that information.
Okay. And since you thought I was going to ask the question, and I'm assuming the answer is yes, the city is capable of tracking this over the lifetime of a building?
Yes. I prefer to start with the 10-year, simply because it gives a little bit more flexibility and allows us some time to learn. But I'm confident that if the commission and ultimately the Board of Aldermen were to approve going over the lifetime of a building, that we would have no problem implementing that system.
Okay. Last question, and did I understand correctly that if we did the lifetime cumulative approach, that could result in a greater discount than a 10-year, or it's just the existence of a cumulative approach?
The feedback, the unofficial feedback I've gotten on that is if we have a cumulative standard, we'll get the points.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Nurnberger.
Justin, we come up with the value on the home or the commercial property, where it would be based upon? Would it be the cities or the counties' assessed value, or would it be to come up with the 50% number?
So, and we do this currently today because we have the one-time evaluation standard in place. So what we do is when a permit comes in, all development within the floodplain is required to have a floodplain development permit with it. So the floodplain development permit comes in, we go to St. Louis County's website, we pull it off of their tax records, and they break it down, structure, land, and total appraised value, and we use that as a starting point. If we run into an issue and say someone's doing a $51,000 improvement, and we go to the county's website and it says it's worth $100,000, so you're 51%, so technically you couldn't do it. Basically what we would do is we would call the applicant, we would talk to them, we would say, hey, based off of the information that the city has, this improvement exceeds this requirement, so you would need to comply with additional requirements. We would also let them know that if they believe that the county's information is incorrect, that they can submit an appraisal to us, and we will use that appraisal in lieu of the county's information.
Okay, that answers my question. And then what would happen if you're doing a $50,000 improvement? What happens to the value of the home then? It would be $150,000 at that point.
And so we would use the value at the time when you're coming in for an improvement. So if you came in today in this 10-year horizon we're in place, or the life of the building, and you had a $100,000 structure and you did a $40,000 improvement, we would say, okay, that's 40%, so that's fine. And then if you come in the next year and we look at it in the value of the structure is $140,000, we use that as the baseline to establish the 50%. So we would bring the $40,000 improvement over, plus whatever the new improvement value is, and divide it by the current value of the structure. So it gives you credit for increases or it penalizes you for decreases in the value of a structure.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Ms. Bilderbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last month, kind of weighing some of the pros and cons on it. And the CRS community thing is interesting. I think that the discounted rates on the insurance is really important, and I think it affects a lot of different people. I also would imagine that over time, the floodplain regulations are going to become more and more stringent because everything we've seen, I still remember when MSD did a lot of its regulatory changes in '93, and it's just kept getting worse and worse. FEMA and SEMA are no different. I like the idea of Brentwood maybe getting out in front of this a little bit. I don't really see, looking at the cumulative, I don't really see the 10-year period as really making any difference from a policy standpoint, because to me it's like playing with numbers. You do it this year and then the next year you've got a higher valuation, and so then you get to do more. I mean, we could play this game into infinity and not really solve the problem. And the problem is flooding, and the problem is flood insurance rates. All of these regulations can be difficult, they can be really challenging, they can be really hard, to adjust to, and obviously they always affect people. Just like a lot of the other things that we've done with sign codes or like gravel driveways or all sorts of things like that. I really think that it would behoove us to look at doing it during the life of a building. And I also think that that would be easier to track from the standpoint of you wouldn't have it falling off the cliff. When you hit that 10-year period, then the year falls off, and then you have to, it's pretty straightforward that way. And I like that idea. I have a couple other options if folks, something creative that came into my mind, if folks here don't really, on the commission don't like that idea. I think it would be better public policy, and I think we'd be better served in the long run, even if it's not, everything's not always easy when you do it the first time. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ms. Hanson.
The changes to the substantial improvement and substantial damage definitions are not mandated. So if we don't make those changes, what do you speculate is going to happen?
Well, I think what I could speak to for certain is we just would not receive those points, and it would affect the discount ultimately, or potentially the lack of a discount that we would ultimately receive for the property owners within the city.
Outside of that, are there any other ill effects you can see for the homeowners or commercial properties?
I think that we would continue to see the status quo of what we've seen over the last 45 or 50 years under the current regulation, which is we're going to maintain and continue to have structures that are non-compliant structures in the floodplain, and some of which are repetitive loss structures.
Thank you.
So what we don't know is the difference in the discount between a municipality is a CRS community but hasn't adopted the cumulative definitions, and the difference between one that has.
And it's the book that shows you how to calculate all this is 614 pages long. And so to be able to just isolate one part of it and give a good solid impact on, if you change A or B. Now, ultimately, we'll be able to tell what that is, but we won't be able to tell what it is until we're much further into the process with FEMA and SEMA and sitting down and actually, getting all the details for our application and finalizing the city's entry into.
Thank you. Any other commission members before we open this up to the audience? Okay, are there any members of the audience that would like to address the commission on this petition? Please step forward, make a line, state your name and your address. Let us know your thoughts.
My name is Jeff Daniels. I'm president of Daniels Realty Group. I'm the landlord for an office building over on the corner of Manchester and Mary, 8700 to 8712 Manchester. If I hear you correct, you're saying that the regulations are going to be based on the cost of the improvements. If you're doing improvements to a building and it's cumulative, you're taking those off of what we bring in and give you as value for those improvements? The cost of the permits, and if we put down that those improvements are $80,000, you're adding that to our basis for future use going forward?
I'm not sure I understand.
All right, let's say you got a building that's worth $2 million, and I got a tenant coming in, and I'm going to do tenant improvement work that costs $100,000. So now I got a $2.1 million, is that what you're telling me?
No, the city does not make that determination.
Okay. Who does?
The county assessor. Or if you guys disagree with the information that comes from the county's assessors, then you could submit an appraisal to the city on what the value is after that.
All right, so every time that we do something, if we wanted to do it in going forward, we're looking at the county records from the standpoint of what the value is?
Well, that's what we do today.
Okay. So anything we tear out, because, you know, when you're doing these things, you might have a tenant in there for 5 or 6 years, it comes out, you're tearing out everything that you put in before and you're starting over. You know, so the cost of those improvements are gone. They're just out of there. You're probably still back at your $2 million, you know, so I'm just curious as to how this cumulative value is done over a period of years.
It's done based off of the value of the structure at the time when you apply.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Brian McGovern. I'm an attorney with the law firm of McCarthy and Leonard, located here in St. Louis. I'm here tonight on behalf of DDR Corporation, which is obviously the property, the promenade at Brentwood. They are concerned about this, and the specific concern they have does relate to the new definition for substantial improvement, and it is the cumulative effect. Particularly, you've got the language, any combination of reconstruction, alteration, or improvements to a building taking place, and again, our preference would be 10 years if in fact this is to go through, in which the cumulative percentage of improvement equals or exceeds 50%. Now, what it goes on to say, and this is equally problematic for DDR, for purposes of the definition, an improvement occurs when the first alteration of any wall, ceiling, floor, or other structural part of the building commences. The triggering event is any work, as we read that, because I think that would be interpreted rather broadly as to the trigger as to when this would kick in. We do believe, and the company is concerned, that this is in fact for them a disincentive for any expansion or improvement of the property. There is some of the property at Promenade, which I believe is outside of the floodplain, and I guess this is more of a question for Mr. Wise. If in fact there is going to be an expansion or any redevelopment at that site that then encroaches into the floodplain, does that then trigger this provision such that the entire building is going to have to be flood-proof? Because if in fact that is how this is going to be interpreted, it is going to, again, be very much a disincentive for the company to do any improvement or further work at the site. Those are the concerns. They wanted me to express those to you tonight and speak to you further in terms of any possibly exceptions that could take place and whether that is for existing property currently outside the floodplain or any other exceptions that wouldn't have as significant of an impact on any improvements at that site. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wise, a couple questions. Is the language in these definitions directly from the feds?
That is correct.
Okay. And how about Mr. McGovern's question about a property that straddles the floodplain boundary?
Well, I guess I would have a couple of comments on that. One, with the age of the promenade, I would assume that those structures are compliant structures that are elevated currently 1 foot out of the floodplain.
I would assume they are, and I would assume any work that was going to be done.
So this would not affect any of the existing structures that are out there. Any new development, regardless of this change, would have to be constructed 1 foot above the floodplain.
I guess the question would and again, there's a lot of language in here, all of which I have not had a chance to review.
Sure.
But would it require the entire building to then come within compliance with whatever other requirements are contained within the proposed ordinance?
Well, I believe what you just said is the entire building is in
I don't know that.
compliance.
I don't want to represent that to you. I would assume so.
Okay.
But I can't tell you that each of the buildings and structures out there are in fact in compliance, because some of them, I believe, are outside the floodplain.
Right. And simply because a property is located within the floodplain does not make it in and of itself a non-compliant structure. You can build in the floodplain under certain regulations. Elevate it 1 foot above the base flood elevation, or you flood-proof the property. If you comply with those two regulations, none of these changes would impact anything. So if they were to come in and do an expansion, they would have to, the new expansion would have to be a foot above, and that would be all that they would be required to do.
The last comment is the point system that they utilize, whether it's FEMA, SEMA, is much like if you're getting a grant from the U.S. government for any street improvement, putting down medians down the street. And Mr. Weiss is correct. Those points move. I can lose points in one section, I can pick up points in another. So they're not conclusive. And so I would ask if there is a way in which other points can be picked up. And I recognize your 600-page document. You would at least consider that, because this could very much impede any further development out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tom Dunn, D-U-N-N. I'm the owner of 6 acres of property located at 2740 Bompard. And this will adversely impact anything that I will be doing there. This piece is generally located right behind the storage bank, and with access off of Bomport as well as my easement. It's also in back of the current public works portion. I've got a few questions. We were just sent this letter, so a week ago I'm apprised of all of this. I need to be brought up to speed before anything takes place. As Mr. McGovern just said, this will adversely impact any development in any area of your city that might be considered floodplain. My first question would be, what will the elevation changes be under this new program?
There are no elevation changes.
None whatsoever?
None whatsoever.
That's off record, okay?
The city does not
Will
have
that be the
authority.
same as FEMA?
What was that?
Will that be the same as FEMA?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to have a definition of what a 10-year horizon is.
10 years.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I mean, can you? I mean, it's.
I put in a call earlier today, but due to the stress of time, we just shouldn't have it. My name's Tom, and it's on your recorder.
Okay. And I can certainly talk with you after the meeting.
Well,
if you
sure.
have additional
Well, and
questions.
what I'm going to go through is the perils of any quick decisions, and there are many perils. What is a substantial? Can someone define that? Anybody?
It's defined in. Were you able to pick up a copy of the materials outside?
Yes, but I wasn't able.
Okay. There
That's
is.
outside. I wasn't able to read it. So I am not. I am very ignorant.
No.
So I'm going to. That's the first thing.
Yeah, there is a definition of what is a substantial improvement that's
Okay.
and that is essentially what the
Okay.
commission is considering.
The 50% value, as you have so eloquently put it, is really a magnanimous, egregious, arbitrary, and capricious way of trying to get to some government control under condemnation. This is tantamount. What you're dealing with here is almost tantamount to condemnation. And there are no Chapter 353s. There's none of this that can take place under a resolution. So I think we have to really consider what we're thinking about here. Who would possibly recompense me for my property if these changes occur?
Are there any improvements on your properties?
There are none, except what MSD has come through without permission, and also with the Lions Club, who tends to use the property.
Under the changes that are being considered by the commission right now, nothing would change if someone were to come in for a development of your site today. Whether they come in, if this is approved or not approved, the development requirements to still be compliant with the current floodplain regulations are the same.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But if these are changed so that the city can gain points under the theory that we can possibly reduce this by 10% to those people who are in flood with improvements, possibly. And as Mr. McGovern so simply states, that moves around often. Government changes. ask yourselves, do we want to be a city of controlling private enterprise more or less? 624 pages?
Yeah, 14, I think, but yeah, a lot.
Does that remind you of anything recently? Has anyone read it? Okay, why would we go forward until we get some facts, until you see what can occur to private ownership, private property rights, guaranteed by the Constitution? We're all starting to think we can control our neighbor. I hope that you can listen to your heart and maybe just think. I mean, there's so many questions here. Please, someone define value. This is incredible. Value. Would somebody define beauty? Try to get there. See how many lawsuits are created. It's capricious. It's arbitrary. You're opening yourselves up to unbelievable events. If you take my property rights, there'll be more of me. So I'd rather work with the city as opposed against it. And trust me, next to Mr. McGovern's property he's representing, it would take maybe 10 days to solicit the right people to let you know maybe this is not such a good thing. Let's really think it through. What points can we possibly get? Who benefits? Is it the city that benefits, or is it private enterprise and property? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Hello, I'm Gene Holtzman with Hutkin Development Company. We manage and operate 150,000 square feet of industrial space on Brentwood Industrial. And I have more questions than I have concerns, but my lack of answers to some of these things only heighten those concerns. But I'll start by letting you know that it may be the sort of thing, if I understood better, it would help calm some of those concerns. But there's concern / confusion, and I guess part of it, when I read the definition of substantial improvements, I still don't know what it means. It seems like it's so open to interpretation. I can't tell if is a new roof, a substantial improvement by how it's defined, or a repair of a retaining wall that might require. Is it those things that are natural part of the functional or physical obsolescence of a building that just come with the territory of what you have to maintain, replace, and repair just to keep the building going? Because a lot of those do require, certainly require permits, but they don't improve anything, they just keep it from falling apart.
And yes, those items would fall under that definition.
Okay, and then is the same the case with if tenant improvements requiring a permit, that is there any accounting imbalance for what is taken out? Because with tenant improvements are also often an investment not in a building, but in a lease and a tenant, that they don't really represent. A lot of times they represent a liability more than they do an asset or an improved value to the building. They simply are trying to work within an economic structure of a lease, but often are highly tenant specific and are no. They're not, in that sense, they're not improvements in any kind of way that we would think about it, that are improvements and betterments to a building that add value. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't sound like the definition of improvements has anything to do with investment, capital investment that increases value. It's just spending money.
And that is correct.
Okay.
Your understanding of that is, you're correct.
And then I can't tell, and this is where my biggest series of I've got to inform myself better and should before I even make this comment, but it sort of seems like to the extent that we're talking about potentially a 10% or greater discount maybe on flood insurance premiums. It sounds like from a commercial real estate owner and developer's point of view, a case, at least for us, where the cure is likely worse than the disease. That if you're talking about a trigger that may require all sorts of investment that may or may not make any economic sense, in which case you do have to look very seriously at not in some kind of self-serving economic way, but just simply on these things are investment vehicles and assets. And if it stops making any economic sense to improve it, you got to stop. That if it's possible by adding the next $100,000 lease to attract a valuable, good, strong tenant, which typically is what the community wants as well as the landlord, if that would then cause the trigger of potentially a $500,000 expense, you're going to go with a just keep it, don't ever improve it, just keep it. And that is a process of devaluing and declining your base of quality of commercial real estate, of maintenance of commercial real estate, of the quality of the tenants that you can attract to the community. And I can tell you that's not a risk. That's an absolute. That's what will happen. That if suddenly Brentwood Industrial, I'm sure all of you know, I mean, real estate values and cost of operations have gone up, real estate values have gone down, and rental rates have gone down. There's an unbelievable squeeze in the return on investment, the return on equity, to a point where, honestly, you're not seeing a whole lot of the market's totally stagnant for a reason in terms of sale transactions, because it doesn't make sense anymore for new money coming in unless there's some completely external reason why you need to do it. There are no. I just did tax appeals on about 1 million square feet of commercial real estate and talked to appraisers. There are no, the market, there is no market. And there's reason for that. So if on top of that, with declining values and declining income, you add potential unknowns related to future expenses, it is going to absolutely harm values, but it's also going to harm the kind of tenant you can bring in and the kind of rent structures that are offered and the kind of improvements that anybody can make sense out of. You have to deal with the fact that somebody, if we're looking at painting one of these buildings, we just put on one of them $300,000 worth of roofs. If you're faced with a horrible dilemma, do you let it go into decline? And that's sort of the danger and risk, it seems, of having this contingent expense out there. And I don't know what it is. I'm trying to understand. That leads to the other thing that I feel that I have to really better inform myself of. I don't know what floodproofing is. And I also don't know if there is any exemption or exception related to economic or even practical feasibility. I mean, I'm not even sure by reading that if there are certain standards required for whatever in the world floodproofing is, and if it's not economically or even functionally feasible to do it, that if you're just at this weird sort of catch-22 and impasse where you just turn over the keys to somebody, just close the building. I can't tell from what I read if there's any even protection. If you can't do it, what if you can't do it? I mean, do you know the answer to that, Justin?
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
We deal with this exact situation on properties that we have today. And so I think that, not necessarily in the developments that you have, but there are other areas of the city where we see the exact dilemmas under our current regulations as you're describing. And we have situations where we have property owners that the properties are to a point where, to basically bring it up to current standard is, in their opinion, cost prohibitive. And those properties, they are enforcement issues, and they are, I'm sure, from the property owner standpoint, issues that they have issues with.
I guess my question is, are there specific exceptions and exemptions related under how the requirements would work for upgrading to current requirements, code requirements?
There are certain provisions in the code for that allow for, if a building is literally about to fall over, that, improvements can be made for life safety issues. But there are no provisions that say, the building needs a new roof, and that puts us over this 50% value, and then there's no kind of an end around, I guess. There is nothing like that is provided in this ordinance.
If I go on too long, I won't be offended if somebody tells me to, talk to Justin or somebody else outside of this meeting. But it would be helpful for me to understand, or for you to refer me to where I can find out exactly what those things are of current codes related to floodproofing. Because we can't change our finished floors. If it says no, and I don't know that this is the case, but if it says no finished floors at the that aren't above the floodplain, we'll put our buildings on the market and try to dump them tomorrow. I mean, if that's the direction this is going, it can't happen. I'm sorry. There are certain things we can't do, and so from what you're describing, it doesn't sound like there's any provision for not having to do the things you can't do. Or if these buildings, you can look on the county tax rolls now, about roughly $30 a foot, which is just a total collapse in values on the 100,000 square feet. So figure that's about $3 million that 5, 6, 7 years ago was $4.5 million. As far as we're concerned, we've already lost $1.5 million. May appear to be on paper, but it's real value, real asset. So if there is a situation that requires $1 million investment with no additional ability to get more rent or any value added to the asset, we couldn't do it. It wouldn't make any sense. There would be, you'd be better off dumping the building at any price and putting the money in virtually no return treasuries or something. So what I'm saying is that there's a world of implications based on a combination of the little bit that I do understand and the lot that I don't understand that really baffles me. We're okay with our flood insurance. We're fine. We'd rather do that. So it seems to me, if most people that you're saying would benefit from this don't want the benefit, that it does, I'm like an anti-conspiracy theory. I never think anybody's smart enough or organized or systematic enough to have conspiracies, but it seems like there's some other motivation that I'm not understanding.
And I can speak very briefly to that on behalf of the commission, if you'll allow me. I think that's the reason why they wanted to send out notification to all the property owners, is because they did want to hear from you all. Mm-hmm. And so I think as far as the conspiracy goes, there is no conspiracy. We feel like the city was presented with a system or a plan that could potentially provide discounts for property owners within the city, that it was part of our responsibility to at least investigate it. Upon investigation, they said, why don't we get the people who this is going to impact into the room? And that's where we are this evening.
Well, okay, then I'll close with just simply saying, to the extent that I do understand it, and it's very superficial, and I admit entirely, I would need to educate myself better to have a better informed opinion, but it really scares me. It really sounds more harmful to, especially in these times. I mean, maybe look at it in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, when if the economy changes, if the situation related to commercial and residential values changes, but to add an extra burden and to also add a potential extra expense when, in fact, as I said, we could invest $100,000 in an Otis elevator who's a tenant there. That is not in any way an improvement for us. That is just simply an investment in the lease. It means nothing. Doesn't represent anything except, and if anything, we should get a credit for those things don't improve the asset value. That you should say, okay, reduce that by $100,000. Now you got a credit. You get to spend $100,000 before you're back to zero. It's not a good measure. It's not an improvement in that sense. And so maybe I know that that's their language, but maybe the city has a different kind of latitude to figure out what is an improvement, rather than just you file for a permit that costs money, that's an improvement. So again, there's a world of concerns. Those are some of them, and I will try to read up more so I can see if my concerns get worse or better. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hey guys, doing? My name's Tony Delgado. Own 2860 Manderley and 8909 Russell and 8911 Russell. And I would like to also know what floodproofing is, the actual terms of it, because I'm a union carpenter, and there's been times and times again where we would floodproof a structure, and you can't stop water. I mean, it's impossible to floodproof anything. In Mother Nature's Mother Nature, just as you can see in Katrina, or even in the World Trade Towers. They were built to withstand a plane, but evidently that didn't happen. So all these added costs that we're going to have to go through for flood protection is not going to be reflected in the 10% savings of premium. Because I know I pay for the 2860 Manderley house $1,200 a year, so that's $120 a year I'd be saving. So in 10 years, I get $1,200 back, when I know the added cost would be more reflective in the obstacles I'd have to go to floodproof a structure. So I just agree with Mr. Dunn and the last gentleman that I would definitely want to support this transition into this federally protected program. And can you give me the terms of floodproofing a house? As say I own a structure now that's just land, and I would like to build a house on there. What would 1 feet above elevation, and then
That's it.
what if I can't substantiate that? Is there another way to go about floodproofing a house if it's below the floodplain?
Sure. If you're
Would he wrap it in rubber?
No, what we do from the city, we don't define what floodproofing is. What we require is that you have an architect or an engineer sign off on it, sign and seal it, that basically says, if it floods, that it won't penetrate the structure and won't cause damage to the structure.
And when have you known that'd be possible, except for a boat?
We do have several properties that have gone through this problem.
The one right next door to mine is supposedly floodproof, and it's got a 6x6 hole in the foundation to alleviate the water that goes in the foundation. So
and if
an architect stamps off it then and says, "Say okay, that's fine by you."
Yeah.
Okay. And then you would receive.
Essentially, what the floodproofing term is it comes from, it gives the federal government, the assurance that if there is a flood, and someone submits a flood claim on it, that they can review it and they can say, no, this structure was designed in compliance and there's not supposed to be damage because of an improvement that should be compliant.
And then if I had the last flood we had in 2-3 years ago, I had about say $30,000 worth of damage, and I got a $4,000 check for FEMA, and that just barely cleaned up the basement, So FEMA's never helped me before, and they're not going to help me now. So this 10%, it's arbitrary. I just don't agree with it. And that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Okay, just for the record, Mr. Wise, so the floodproofing, this is just for Mr. Wise, it's fine, but just to extrapolate on your position, floodproofing, what is required to floodproof a building is not changing at all with this
That is correct.
proposed requirement.
Right.
And the city's definition of floodproofing is an architect signing off
Or an engineer.
that the building meets the
Right.
requirements
That is
for
correct.
floodproofing.
Right.
Okay, and that's not changing.
That is not changing.
Okay, my name's Lisa Delgado, and that's my son. And we just did buy some property in November 30th of 12 down on Russell. There's actually nothing there now, it's just land. And we were wanting to put a house up, possibly, so I got the letter. So you're saying that, like, because the house that is next to us looks like it's flood-proof, it's already built, like it's got a big old foundation and everything. It looks like it's, compliant with all the new stuff, like if you were going to put a house there. But I'm just concerned, because if we do put the house up, we want it to be right and stuff. And I'm wondering, I'm getting confused. But because I had somebody try to buy the land because I was trying to also dump it because it seems like, this is going to be very onerous to go with all these new things. But I had somebody try to buy the land and they wanted to put up a place to store their boats, which would be perfect because it's in a flood zone. And then the city said it couldn't be put up. And so my real estate lady called me and told me that it was a no-go with Brentwood, even though that it sounded really good because it's just an empty piece of land now and somebody wanted to buy it and use it to store boats, which sounds perfect in a flood zone, but then Brentwood said no. But when I bought the land, I was told I could do what I want with it. It was residential or commercial. And then all of a sudden, a year later, my potential buyer for the empty lot was told they could not do that. And so I'm just concerned that, like, I did have a flood at another property, and I pay a lot in flood insurance, and that is like I did $30,000 worth of damage of flood, and I got a $4,000 check for $4,000 back on $30,000 of damage after paying flood insurance for years in the thousands, and I get back just enough to throw out the wet garbage. So I'm not happy with flood things because it just gets more and more onto me, and there's no return in it. I have experience. There's no question. I just had to state that.
Any other member like to address the commission?
Yes, my name is Trent Moeller, and I own the building at 700 Hanley Industrial Court, also known as the Cut Rate Brain Surgery Building. Keep the applause to minimum. Anyway, we're pretty much kind of built out already in terms of kind of the footprints kind of there, and so I wasn't really that concerned coming into the meeting. I wanted to kind of come and hear about it, and after hearing the other people speaking, I guess my ears are a little bit perked up. And I think the gentleman who just spoke kind of summarized the most important point for me, which is if the only benefit is the 10%, or even if you said 50%, my flood insurance is like $5,500 a year, so $550 a year, obviously times 10, ultimately you end up getting to what your annual premium is in savings. And the question for me is kind of what is the opportunity cost were I in a position to have to sell the building? And what if it decreases the perceived value of the building by more than the $5,500? So that's kind of what my concern is, and wasn't really thinking about it in those terms when I came in the room, but I think at least some time of reflection and expanding on kind of the interpretation of what that would look like might be a good idea. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other member of the audience like to address the commission? If not, we're going to open back. Oh, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you. My name's Daniel Hollander. We own a property at 2646 Dorothy, and I would echo what the previous speaker said. We're not in favor of this. We'd be willing to pay, whatever the going rate is for the flood insurance. We'd much prefer that than to have this go forward. And it's been pointed out several times by the council that to clarify, the definition of floodproofing would not be changed. I understand that, but clearly it seems to me that when you have to make your building floodproof would change, and I think that's the point. And I just found out about this like many people here, so I haven't had enough time to thoroughly research it, but from some of the comments I've heard made earlier, I want to see if I understand the process right. Some of the council referred to the recommendation from the staff. So is it the case that the staff, I guess Mr. Weiss, is making a recommendation to the you're not the council, the
Commission.
commission, and then the commission makes a recommendation. Okay, and Mr. Weiss seemed to me to, at one point here, like to say, well, we're not recommending this, we're just investigating it. But it seemed to me that earlier that I heard the commission say something about that the staff was recommending this. So I'm kind of confused about whether staff is recommending it or whether the staff is just investigating it.
Okay, well, I mean, I think staff has given us their investigation. Staff has identified the idea of a CRS community and Brentwood being a CRS community as a worthy goal. So I think it's investigated different ways in which we can become a CRS community. And it's up to the commission to listen to that investigation and make its own decision.
Okay, I thought I heard you say something earlier about the staff recommending. Did I not hear that right?
Oh, I don't, Mr. Wise, if you want to go on the record with your recommendation, you don't need to.
No, I have no problem. Staff has looked at this. We've investigated it, like you've said. It is staff's opinion that this proposed change furthers the goals of the comprehensive plan, that it seeks the balance that's discussed in the plan, and that it furthers compliance with floodplain regulations and seeks to promote the benefits of having flood compliant structures within the city, and therefore staff is supportive of this change. And that is the recommendation that we have presented to the commission for your consideration in making a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen.
Okay, is this like in court? Are these proceedings being recorded? Is there going to be a transcript, and will that be publicly available?
I believe all the answers to those questions are yes. Is that right, Mr. McCarthy?
That's correct. You would have to get the transcripts through the city office.
Okay, and will
it
the...
It will be on television, on the cable channel, on ATT Uverse, and on YouTube. And available in the library on a DVD.
Okay. Will the commission be making a decision tonight as to whether they want to recommend this or not? And will you be telling us tonight what that decision is?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that question. It's going to be up to whichever commission member would like to make a motion.
Okay, and I would just like to clarify and say again, we don't want this. If you're trying to do this to help us, please don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other member of the audience like to address the commission? If not, are there any commission members that would like? Mr. Nurnberg.
I just want to make a clarification to this gentleman's point. We're a recommending body, and it will go to the Board of Aldermen for a final vote to have it go into ordinance or to make the change. So there would be another time to go in front of your elected officials to talk about this as well. And that would be on, if there was a vote tonight, when would that be?
April 7th.
Okay, so you can show up at the Board of Aldermen meeting and you can talk to your alderman before that meeting, have you a little bit more time to research this and that sort of thing. So, and that's why we wanted you to come out today. So.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that point. The way the code is written did not obligate the city to provide notice to its citizens over and above what we typically do for our meetings. You all have shown, many of you have shown up tonight and have offered comments, and it certainly has, it's been compelling and it's been telling as far as I'm concerned. I can't speak for the entire commission, but it was actually a commission, Mr. McDonald actually suggested that we specifically invite all those people that are affected, or could be affected by this ruling. So I do want to say thank you for coming out tonight and sharing your thoughts and your sentiments on this issue. But that was a voluntary option on the part of the commission. We want to make sure we're fully informed with the opinions of our citizens.
Thank you.
Any other commission members?
I just had one quick clarification, kind of follow up on, make sure we're all on the same page here. This, and maybe you know this, the 50% that's been discussed is nothing new. It's in the code right now. So if you made an improvement last year, 2 years ago, that was 50% of the value of your property, then under the code as it stands right now, you needed to bring your property into compliance. Is that correct, Justin?
That is correct.
really the only substantive change, there are a number of changes that would need to be made in order to qualify under the CRS. It's not a 50% threshold. That is already in place. That's the law as of today. What we're looking at is two things. Number one, and they're kind of tied together, and that is making that 50% cumulative. So it's not just a one-time improvement to determine whether or not you meet that threshold. It would be either a 10-year period look back or going to the life of the building. So again, I can't stress that enough. The 50% threshold is not new. We're not looking at that. That's in place right now. It is simply, do we extend the period to apply that 50%?
Well, it's not simply that. That's the difference of night and day.
Okay, and I understand that, and I just wanted to make sure, because I'm not trying to minimize what you're saying. I just wanted to make sure, because what I was picking up on, and maybe I was hearing that incorrectly, what I was picking up on is that there's a thought that we are looking at imposing a 50% threshold, which is not the case. It's there right now, and if I misunderstood anybody, I apologize for that. Again, I'm not trying to minimize what has been said. I think you all raised some very valid points. And in keeping with that, my suggestion would be that we go to subcommittee or whatever the chairman thinks in order to try to flush this out a little bit more.
Okay, well, let me go to Mr. Albertino. If you'd like to make a motion to that effect, that'd be accepted.
A couple of comments. Since I'm the token architect on the board, and I was asked, hey, what is floodproofing? I've not dealt with that. My experience has been, and with the DDR, and when we do new developments, you're bringing the buildings out of the floodplain. I don't think you're going to get insurance on any property that you build within the floodplain. So what was talked about tonight, and these putting any more implications on building a development or adding on to a development or whatever that may be, I don't think that has an impact to it. I think Gene brought up a great point and something that we haven't thought about. So yeah, the 50% is there, Mr. Dimmitt, and if you do a building and you sign a 4-year lease and you do a $500,000 tenant improvement, does that add value to the building? Probably not. You come in 4 years later and you get a new tenant, you rip out the tenant improvement, you put in a new tenant improvement under this current situation, you're going to get dinked on, wow, now all of a sudden you put twice the value of improvements in here. The property value hasn't gone up at all. Or if you put a new roof on, does the building get more valuable in the eyes? It's general maintenance. So general maintenance, it doesn't have an impact on the property value. It just tries to hold it even. You're going to get in trouble in this scenario if you paint the building, if you do, you put new siding, you put whatever. If it's not a real improvement to it, the value's not going up, but this will impose people not being able to do general maintenance or re-tenant a building. And that's something that, until the community came out tonight, I didn't look at it that way, but I think it's a valid point.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that would be, Mr. Wise, that'd be something we'd want to clarify is, and I note that the definition of substantial improvement is limited to alterations of walls, ceilings, or structural parts of the building. But what would be, how would the implications of, what if they're doing structural improvements and non-structural improvements? Would it be only the structural improvements that would be included in the amount?
It depends on what you're saying for the non-structural improvements.
Painting.
I mean, if you paint, that's not going to be included. But if you do, cosmetic, like what we're saying, like tenant kind of white box type of finishes that require you to pull a permit, that would absolutely be included under this definition.
So you'd almost have to say, well, I need a demo permit first, and what is my demo taking out of that improvement? So I got charged $50,000 4 years ago when I put this tenant in. I'm now taking it out and I'm putting a new tenant in for $50,000. I think it should be a net zero because you took out 50 of what you were charged for in the first time, and now this time there shouldn't be an
and all of the demo costs would be included as well.
And if we were to go that route and look at something like that, my recommendation would be that we would just not go with this route, because FEMA's no longer going to give us credit for that because from their perspective, they're running an insurance program. And they're giving us those discounts because we're ultimately, getting non-compliant structures out and replacing them with compliant structures and reducing flood insurance claims. And so if
Please.
If the commission were to agree with this idea, I would say instead of trying to make it more complex, that the commission look to pull that section out and keep what we would currently have in the code.
Right. Okay, commissioners, I see three options. One, we can
Mr. Chairman.
move to. Yeah, Mr. Glasky, go ahead.
Is there any urgency to moving this forward, advancing it?
No, we're all right. We've got time still.
It sounds to me like this needs more study, more discussion, more investigation, including contacting the aldermen that represent the affected property owners. So I would be in favor of just tabling it.
You want to make a motion to that effect?
I will once the comment portion is over.
Anyone else? Ms. Bilderbeck?
I'd also like to add, it's a matter of balancing different interests. As I talked about how the stormwater and floodplain regulations have changed over time, and all of these things are obviously difficult. They're difficult for property owners, they're difficult for a community, but they serve an overall public goal. So it's a matter of balancing, public policy and moving a community forward or staying where you are. And I think that a lot of valid points have been made. I think a lot of those questions and concerns actually, could be addressed once it was more fully understood. There's no question that it's going to impact some people. There's no question. Any of the things that we do here impacts people. Any of the regulations, any of the architectural requirements we put on commercial buildings, any of the stormwater requirements that we do. And Brentwood has some of the more onerous stormwater requirements in the region, and MSD is pretty stringent itself. All of these things have an effect. I'll never forget, the people a long time ago who were upset about the gravel driveways, and I had to pay money and that I didn't have and had to borrow it from my parents to put in a concrete driveway instead of gravel. But, I had to do it. So, all of these things are relative and all of these things are important, but I just want to make the point that I don't think what has really been said, I think that Mr. Weiss got at it a little bit when he was talking about FEMA, but there is a general public interest in preserving the floodplain, in preventing, flooding that happens, and the more where the water has a place to go, where it's not causing any damage, serves a benefit. So, there is the idea that you don't want to have properties that keep getting flooded over and over and over because it's not beneficial to anyone. So I think that I'm just going to go ahead and say it, and I'm going to be honest, that otherwise why would we be looking at it? There are insurance benefits, but there's overall public goals that this country has been moving to and in our region, which is trying to, and we're not talking about preserving floodplain, we're talking about trying to prevent the flooding of properties. How is that possible? So as we go forward with this, I just want to put that out there that that's something else, and it's a balancing act, and it's not always comfortable, and it's not always easy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so I was saying we have three options, I guess. Move forward with approval of the entirety of the ordinance, including these two definitions. Move forward with approval of the ordinance subtracted by the substantial improvement and substantial damage definitions, or we can refer it over to subcommittee. And the chair will entertain a motion,
Mr. Chairman,
for one of those options.
Yeah, I would suggest that you, instead of making the third option, referring it to site plan committee, that it be tabled, because site plan committee does not have a provision for public comment, and that's probably what we need most.
Okay. What does everybody else think about that?
Agreed.
All right. Well, then it would be a tabling motion nonetheless. So if someone would like to make one of those three motions, the chair will entertain it.
Did we make it?
No.
So moved. We table this.
Okay, motion by Mr. Glasky, second by Ms. Bilderback.
Does it cause any problems from the timeline that you were talking about?
We're okay. We're fine on timing.
Okay. Voice vote is okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the petition will be tabled until the next regular session of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any new business?
And,
Yes, Mr. Wise.
and just for the public's benefit, the date of that next Planning and Zoning meeting is April 9th, and it is scheduled at 7 p.m. again in this room. So if anybody would like to attend, it will be that night in this room.
Okay, thank you. And again, all of your comments were much appreciated, and you are, of course, welcome at the next meeting and encouraged to come. Okay, any new business? I don't see any alder people here. City planner, do you have a report?
Sure. One thing I did want to bring up, there's been a few questions that have come up about the comprehensive plan and where the status of that is with regard to a potential update. And I think the answer at this point is it's still kind of in wait. When the budget went through for this last year, there was a line item for the comprehensive plan in that budget. The budget was approved, however, several aldermen expressed concerns and noted that basically they would not be supportive of approving funding for that project at this time.
When was the last comprehensive plan update generated?
There was one in the last full plan. There was one done, I believe it was 2009. It was a reaffirmation of the current plan. The one prior to that, so essentially the main body of the text is from 2006.
2006. Okay, and what's the industry standard for updating these comprehensive plans?
Well, I think best practices would be 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so over 5 years since the last update and 8 years since the last full plan.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Anything further, Mr. Wise?
Nothing further.
All right. Subcommittee. Sounds like we're going to send this over to a regular session, which is fine. You know, we can always have a public session at these subcommittee meetings, but I think that's fine. That'll give us an opportunity to get the alder people here.
April 8th of 2009.
April 9th, sir.
No, he's talking about the last update.
Oh. Good, thank you. Let the record reflect the last update was April 2009. Okay, rationale, I don't think we have much, but Mr. Wise, you can handle?
Absolutely.
All right, other business? Entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we stand adjourned.